I never used to go to football games. Not once in 3 years. I told myself it was because I didn't care about sports, which was true, but incomplete. The real reason was simpler and more pathetic. I didn't like being part of crowds. I didn't like the way people became something else when they were packed together, all facing the same direction, all wanting the same thing. It felt like losing yourself on purpose, and I'd spent too long trying to figure out who I was to give that up for 2 hours of watching strangers chase a ball across artificial turf. But I went anyway. Every home game, senior year. I told Harper it was because I needed to draw people in motion, that the lighting was interesting, that I was working on a series about collective emotion versus individual isolation. She didn't believe me, but she was kind enough not to say so. She just raised one eyebrow and told me to bring a jacket, because the bleachers got cold after sunset. I always sat in the same spot, high up, northeast corner, where the light towers created a pocket of shadow, and I could see the whole field without being seen. I brought my sketchbook, a thermos of coffee that went cold before halftime, and the quiet certainty that I was doing something deeply stupid. Because I wasn't there to study crowds, or lighting, or the architecture of mass emotion. I was there to watch Carter Blake. Everyone watched Carter Blake. That was the point of him, or at least the point everyone else had decided on. He was the kind of beautiful that photographs couldn't quite capture, all clean lines and unconscious grace, the kind of person who moved through space like he'd been designed for it. When he ran, when he threw, when he stood still with his hands on his hips waiting for the play to reset, he looked like something out of a myth. Not real exactly, better than real. The announcers said his name like it meant something. The student section chanted it. His face was on posters in the student union, in the athletic center, on the side of campus shuttle bus. Carter Blake, number 7, junior year stats, scrolling beneath his smile. He'd probably go pro, everyone said. He had that look, that inevitability. I'd been sketching him since freshman year, which made me either an artist or a stalker, depending on how generous you wanted to be. It started accidentally. I'd been assigned to draw figures in motion for a fundamentals course, and the instructor suggested attending a sporting event. I went to one game, sat in the back, spent 90 minutes trying to capture the blur and weight of bodies colliding. Most of my sketches were garbage. But there was one, a quarterback mid-throw, arm extended, body twisted in a way that shouldn't have been elegant, but somehow was, that made my instructor pause. She asked if I'd used a photo reference. I told her no. She told me to keep drawing from life. So I did. At first, it was purely technical. The mechanics of movement, the way muscle and momentum created shape. But somewhere along the way, it became something else. I started noticing the things the cameras didn't catch. The way Carter's shoulders dropped when he walked off the field after an incomplete pass. The way he stood a little apart from his teammates during timeouts, present but separate. The way his smile for the press box was different from his smile in the huddle, brighter, emptier. I told myself I was studying contradictions. The distance between public performance and private self. I was a graphic design major. I was supposed to think about branding, about the construction of image. Carter Blake was a case study. That was all. I didn't let myself think about the other thing. The thing that sat beneath my ribs like a stone every time he moved across the field, every time the stadium lights caught his face just right. I'd spent most of my life learning not to want things I couldn't have, and Carter Blake was so far beyond the borders of possible that wanting him felt like a theoretical exercise. Safe, because it was never going to matter. And then one night, midway through October, he scored a touchdown. Nothing unusual about that. He scored touchdowns the way other people breathed. But this time, after the crowd erupted and his teammates mobbed him and the announcers lost their minds, he pulled away, looked up into the stands. I was sketching the defensive line, wasn't even paying attention to him specifically, but some instinct made me glance up, and I watched his eyes move across the bleachers, scanning, searching. They found me. I don't know how. I was 40 rows up, partially hidden, one person among thousands. But his gaze stopped, locked, held, just for a second, maybe two. His chest was still heaving from the run, sweat on his temples, grass stains on his white jersey. And he smiled, not the stadium smile, not the camera smile, something smaller, something that looked almost like relief. Then someone clapped him on the back, and he turned away, and the moment dissolved like it had never existed. I sat there with my pencil frozen over the page, my heartbeat suddenly too loud in my ears, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. A coincidence. He'd been looking past me, or through me, at someone else entirely. But the week after, it happened again. Fourth quarter, another score, and his eyes went straight to my corner of the bleachers. Found me. Help. The third time, I stopped pretending it was an accident. I didn't know what it meant. Didn't let myself guess. Maybe he'd noticed someone drawing him and found it amusing. Maybe he was messing with me. Maybe I'd misread everything and build a narrative out of nothing, the way lonely people do when they're desperate for proof they've been seen. I thought about stopping, not going to the games anymore, not giving him a target to find. It would have been easier, safer, but I kept going, kept sitting in the same spot, kept drawing. And every time Carter Blake scored, every time he had a reason to pause and breathe and look up, his eyes found mine. And every time, I felt the same thing. Like the distance between us, 40 rows, a fence, a world of difference had collapsed into nothing. Like we were the only two people in the stadium who knew something true. I didn't understand it, but I couldn't stop watching. And somewhere deep down, beneath all my carefully constructed defenses, I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he couldn't stop watching me either. I perfected the art of being invisible long before I got to college. It wasn't something I had to think about anymore. It was just how I moved through the world. I lived off campus in a studio apartment above a laundromat, took classes where participation wasn't mandatory, worked evening shifts at the campus cafe where I could hide behind the espresso machine and avoid conversation. I had one friend, Harper, who I'd met in a color theory course freshman year. She was everything I wasn't: loud, fearless, aggressively social. And for reasons I still didn't understand, she decided I was worth keeping around. She said I collected solitude like other people collected vintage records or houseplants. She wasn't wrong. I'd learned early that being alone was safer than being known. Being known meant being vulnerable, and being vulnerable meant getting hurt, and I'd had enough of that in high school to last me a lifetime. So I kept my head down, did my work, and made sure nobody looked too closely. I was out, technically. I told Harper within the first month of knowing her, mostly because she'd asked directly and I was tired of dancing around pronouns. She nodded, said cool, and asked if I wanted to get Thai food. It was the easiest coming out I'd ever had, which probably said more about my previous attempts than it did about her. But I didn't date, didn't go to Pride events, or join the LGBTQ student union, or put a flag in my social media bio. I just existed quietly in a way that didn't invite questions or attention or expectations. My professors said I had talent. My portfolio was strong enough that I'd already landed a few freelance clients, local businesses that needed logos or marketing materials. I was good at seeing what people wanted to project, at distilling identity into clean lines and color palettes. I understood branding because I understood masks. I'd been wearing one for years. The sketchbook was different. That was private, personal. The drawings I did there weren't for clients or grades or anyone's eyes but mine. They were how I processed things, how I made sense of the world when words weren't enough. And yes, a lot of them were of Carter. Too many of them, probably. Full pages of studies, his hands, his profile, the way his shoulders curved when he was tired. I told myself it was practice. Figure drawing. Gesture and form. I didn't let myself call it what it actually was. I definitely didn't let myself think about what it would mean if anyone ever found them. Harper had seen the sketchbook once, flipped through it while I was making coffee in my apartment. She'd stopped on a full-page portrait of Carter, rendered in charcoal, more detail than I usually allowed myself. She'd looked at me for a long moment, then closed the book and set it down. "Do you want to talk about it?" she'd asked. "No," I'd said. She'd nodded. "Okay, but you know he's supposedly straight, right?" I told her I knew. I told her it didn't matter, that I wasn't interested, that it was just drawing. She looked unconvinced but let it drop. That was 3 months ago, and she hadn't mentioned it since. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I could keep Carter Blake contained in charcoal and distance, a safe obsession that would fade once I graduated and left this campus behind. I thought I had everything under control. Then one Tuesday in late October, I opened my locker in the design building and found a note. It was folded small, tucked between my typography textbook and my laptop. Plain white paper, no envelope. My first thought was that I'd grabbed someone else's locker by mistake, but no, there was my name on the assignment sheet visible through my folder. This was my space, which meant someone had put this here deliberately. I looked around. The hallway was empty, the building quiet between class periods. My hands felt strange as I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unfamiliar, clean, but hurried, written in blue ink. You're the only one who sees me. Meet me on the field after dark. No signature. No explanation. I read it 3 times, standing there with my locker door half open, trying to make my brain process what I was looking at. This had to be a joke. A prank. Someone had found my sketchbook somehow, or seen me at the games, and this was their idea of entertainment. Maybe they were planning to humiliate me. Maybe there'd be people waiting with cameras. Maybe this was how I finally learned that invisibility was a privilege I'd taken for granted. I shoved the note into my bag and slammed my locker shut. My heart was doing something irregular and uncomfortable. I felt sick. I didn't go to the field that night. I went home, locked my door, and tried to convince myself it didn't matter. That whoever had written it would give up, move on, forget. But I kept the note. I don't know why. And late that night, alone in my apartment with the city lights filtering through my window, I pulled out my sketchbook and stared at Carter's face rendered in graphite and hope and something I still wasn't ready to name. I wondered if he was waiting in the dark. I wondered what I'd missed. I wondered if some part of me had wanted to go all along. I spent the next week waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to confront me in class, for my sketchbook to show up plastered across campus social media, for proof that the note had been exactly what I suspected, a setup, a trap, a joke at my expense. But nothing happened. The design building stayed quiet. No one looked at me differently. The world continued exactly as it had before. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Then Carter Blake walked into the cafe. It was a Thursday afternoon, the dead zone between lunch and dinner, when the only customers were usually grad students nursing single espressos for 3 hours. I was wiping down the counter, my shift almost over, thinking about whether I had the energy to work on my senior project or if I was just going to go home and stare at my ceiling. The bell above the door chimed, and I glanced up out of habit. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. I'd never seen him up close before. Not really. The closest I'd gotten was 40 rows and a chain-link fence. But here, in the warm yellow light of the cafe, he was suddenly real in a way that made my sketches feel like lies. Taller than I'd thought. Broader through the shoulders. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow that none of the promotional photos showed. His hair was darker when it wasn't under stadium lights. He looked nervous. That was the part that didn't make sense. Carter Blake, who played in front of 40,000 people, who did press conferences and charity events, and had his face on the side of a bus. He looked nervous ordering coffee. I realized I was staring. Forced myself to move, to step up to the register, to arrange my face into something neutral and professional. "May I help you?" I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. He stepped forward. His eyes met mine, and something in my chest compressed. "Just a coffee," he said. "Black. Large." I nodded. "Rang it up. That'll be $3.50. He handed me a 5. When I gave him his change, his fingers brushed mine, and I felt it everywhere. He noticed. I know he noticed because something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like relief. I made his coffee with hands that wanted to shake. Focused on the mechanics, grind, tamp, brew. Anything to avoid thinking about the fact that Carter Blake was standing 6 feet away from me in my cafe during my shift like this was normal. Like this happened. I set the cup on the counter. He picked it up. Hesitated. "Dorian, right?" My name in his mouth felt like falling. "Imanak et anot." "Thanks," he said. Then he turned to leave, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 5 minutes. He stopped at the tip jar by the door, pulled something from his pocket, dropped it in. Not money. Paper. He left without looking back. I waited until the door closed behind him. Waited another 30 seconds to make sure he was really gone. Then I crossed to the tip jar and pulled out the folded note. My heart was doing that uncomfortable thing again, that arrhythmic thunder that made it hard to think. The handwriting was the same as before. Blue ink on white paper. Please, just once. I stood there holding it until Harper showed up for her shift and asked why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. I went home, sat on my fire escape with the note in my hand, and watched the sun go down over the campus in the distance. The stadium lights came on at 7. I could see them from my apartment, white and stark against the darkening sky. I wondered if he was there, if he was waiting. I told myself I wasn't going to go, that this was still probably a trap, that even if it wasn't, nothing good could come from meeting Carter Blake alone in the dark. I'd spent years building my invisibility, and this was exactly how you lost it, by wanting something badly enough to be stupid. But at 8:30, I put on my jacket. At 9, I started walking. By 9:15, I was standing at the edge of the football field, my breath fogging in the November cold, feeling like the kind of fool who shows up to his own humiliation. The field was empty. The lights were off. I waited in the darkness, hands in my pockets, wondering how long I'd give it before I admitted defeat and went home. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Carter emerged from the shadows near the locker rooms, hood pulled up, hands shoved in his pockets, looking as terrified as I felt. He stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, two people who'd spent months making eye contact across impossible distances, now close enough to touch. "You came," he said quietly. I almost didn't. I answered. He smiled, small and uncertain. "I know. I wasn't sure you would." The space between us hummed with everything we weren't saying. I could hear traffic in the distance, wind through the bleachers, my own pulse too loud in my ears. "Why am I here?" I asked. He took a breath, let out slow. "Because you draw me like I'm human," he said, "not like I'm a story someone else is telling." The honesty in his voice undid something in me. "Maybe I wanted to know if you were," I said. "Human." He stepped closer. The hood fell back, and I could see his face clearly now, stadium lights in the distance catching his eyes. "I've been waiting for you to look back," he said, and I realized that all those times I thought I'd been watching him unseen, he'd been watching me too, searching the bleachers, finding me, hoping. We stood there in the cold and the dark and the weight of everything that had just shifted between us. I didn't know what happened next, but for the first time in years, I wanted to find out. We started meeting in the spaces between things. The empty bleachers after midnight, when campus security had finished their rounds. The corridor outside the visiting team's locker room that nobody used during off-season. The roof behind the library that you could only reach if you knew which fire door had a broken lock. Always after dark. Always carefully. Always with the understanding that what we were doing required invisibility. At first we just talked. Haltingly, like people learning a new language. Carter told me about the weight of being watched all the time, how every move he made was cataloged and analyzed and turned into content for sports blogs and recruiting sites. He said sometimes he forgot what it felt like to do something that wasn't being recorded, evaluated, projected onto a screen somewhere. He said he'd been performing his own life for so long that he wasn't sure anymore what parts of him were real. I told him about choosing to be invisible, about learning that if nobody saw you, nobody could hurt you, about the specific loneliness that comes from being in a room full of people and knowing that not one of them actually knows who you are. He understood. That was the thing that surprised me most. Carter Blake, who lived in spotlights and had his name chanted by thousands, understood exactly what I meant about being unseen. We met 3 times that first week, then 4 times the next. The meetings stretched longer, 2 hours becoming 3, 3 becoming 4. We'd sit with our backs against cold concrete or metal bleachers, close enough that our shoulders touched, and talk about things I'd never said out loud before. He told me he'd known since he was 14, that he'd spent 8 years building a version of himself that everyone would accept while burying the parts that didn't fit the narrative. He said I was the first person he'd ever told. I asked him why me. Why trust someone he'd never spoken to, someone who'd been watching him from the shadows like some kind of obsessive? He said, because you never looked at me like you wanted something from me. Everyone else, they see the quarterback, the prospect, the brand. But in your drawings, and he paused there, smiled a little, in your drawings I look like a person who's allowed to be tired. I hadn't realized he'd seen my work. Hadn't thought about the fact that if he'd been watching me, he'd have seen the sketchbook. My face went hot, and I was grateful for the darkness. "You've seen them," I said. "Some of them. From a distance." He shifted, and I felt the movement through the point where our shoulders connected. "I'm sorry if that's creepy, but I needed to know if I was making it up. If there was actually someone out there who saw me differently." The vulnerability in his voice made my throat tight. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. Just sat there with him in the cold, listening to him breathe. By the third week, I'd started drawing again. Not just Carter this time, but both of us. Sketches of the in-between spaces we inhabited. Empty bleachers rendered in charcoal. Two figures on a rooftop, faces turned toward each other, features blurred because it wasn't about the details. It was about the fact of proximity, about existing in the same frame. One night we sat in the top row of the stadium. The field spread out below us like a dark ocean. The lights were off, but the city glow gave everything a strange amber quality. Carter was wearing his team jacket, and I remember thinking how odd it was that the thing that made him most recognizable was what he wore when he wanted to hide. "I think I'm more myself with you than I am anywhere else," he said quietly. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. I felt the same way, but I couldn't say it. Couldn't admit how much these meetings had started to mean. How I'd begun organizing my days around them, counting hours until I could be in the dark with him again. "Then why are we still hiding?" I asked instead. He didn't answer right away. Looked out across the empty field, jaw tight. "Because I don't know how to be this person in daylight," he finally said. "Because the second this becomes real, becomes public, everything changes. For both of us." He was right. I knew he was right. But sitting there with him close enough that I could feel his warmth through 2 layers of clothing, I started to wonder if maybe some things were worth the cost of being seen. Maybe some things required it. I didn't push, didn't demand anything. We sat in silence until the cold became unbearable, and then we climbed down from the bleachers together. We walked to the edge of campus, to the point where his path diverged from mine. We stood there under a streetlight that flickered like it was trying to decide whether to give up. "Same time tomorrow," he asked. "Yeah," I said. He smiled, started to leave, stopped, turned back. "Dorian," he said. "Yeah, thank you. For showing up. For keeping showing up." I nodded, not trusting my voice. He left, and I walked home through the November cold, my hands shaking in my pockets, my heart doing something complicated and irreversible. I was falling in love with someone who could only exist with me in darkness, and I had no idea how that story could possibly end well. But I kept showing up anyway. The photo appeared on a Monday morning in early December. I didn't see it at first. I was in my Typography 3 seminar, half paying attention to a lecture on negative space when my phone started buzzing. Once, twice, 7 times in 30 seconds. Harper's messages came through rapid fire. "Are you okay? Call me. Don't look at Instagram. Okay, definitely don't look at Twitter either. Where are you?" My stomach dropped before I even knew why. I opened Instagram. It took less than 10 seconds to find it. Someone had posted a photo from the stadium, taken at night, grainy and distant but clear enough. 2 silhouettes on the field, close together, the kind of close that meant something. The caption said, "Guess our golden boy has secrets." The comments underneath were exactly what you'd expect. My hands went numb. I couldn't tell if it was us. The quality was too poor, the distance too great. It could have been anyone. But someone in the comments had tagged Carter's official account. And someone else had mentioned my name. They'd seen me at games, put pieces together, decided this was a story worth telling. By lunch, my name was attached to rumors in 3 different group chats. By dinner, people I'd never spoken were looking at me in the hallways. Staring. Whispering. I felt like a physical weight. Harper found me in the design studio, working on a project I couldn't focus on, my hands moving automatically while my brain tried to process what was happening. She sat down next to me, didn't say anything at first, just sat there, solid and present. "Is it true?" she finally asked. I didn't answer, didn't know how. "Dorian," she said quietly, "whatever it is, I'm here. You know that, right?" I nodded. My throat felt too tight for words. The worst part was that Carter said nothing. No text, no note, no late-night meeting. Practice continued. Games continued. His face stayed on posters. His name stayed in headlines. He existed in public exactly the way he always had, golden and untouchable and completely silent about anything that mattered. 3 days went by. Then 4. The rumors didn't die, but they shifted, became background noise. People found new things to talk about. But the damage was done. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was a name attached to speculation, a supporting character in someone else's scandal. On the 5th day, I saw him. Not intentionally. I was leaving the library at dusk, and he was walking across the quad with 2 teammates, all of them in matching gear, laughing about something. He looked so easy in his skin, so comfortable in daylight. He looked like someone who'd never had to hide anything. Our eyes met for half a second. His smile faltered. Then one of his teammates said something, and he turned away, still laughing, and kept walking. Like I was nobody. Like we'd never sat in the cold and shared pieces of ourselves we'd never shown anyone else. That night, I waited in our usual spot behind the library. Waited for 2 hours in the December cold, my breath fogging, my fingers going numb. He never came. I found him the next afternoon behind the athletic center, leaving practice. His hair was still damp from the shower, his bag slung over one shoulder. He saw me coming, and his whole body tensed. "We need to talk," I said. "Not here," he said, glancing around. "Then where?" I asked. "When?" "Because you've been nowhere for almost a week." He looked at me, and something in his expression was desperate. "Dorian, you don't understand." "No," I said, and my voice came out harder than I meant it to. "You don't understand. I was fine being invisible. I chose that. But now everyone sees me, and you're nowhere. You won't even look at me in public. People are watching," he said quietly. "People are always watching," I said. "That's your whole life. But you only seem to care now that it's about this. About me. That's not fair," he started. "Isn't it?" We stood there in the cold space between buildings, close enough that I could see the conflict in his eyes, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching at his sides. "You're the only thing I've ever wanted that scares me," he finally said, and his voice cracked on the words. The honesty of it hit me like a physical blow. I felt my anger waver, felt myself wanting to forgive him, to understand. But I couldn't. "Not yet." "Then be scared," I said. "But show up anyway. That's what you asked me to do. Remember? You asked me to meet you in the dark, and I did. I kept showing up even when I thought it might destroy me. So don't tell me about being scared." He stepped forward, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him, could smell his shampoo and the cold air clinging to his jacket. His forehead touched mine, and we stood there, breathing the same air, existing in the same impossible moment. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "Neither do I said. "But I can't keep being your secret." "I won't." His eyes closed. I felt him shake with something that might have been a sob or might have been surrender. Around us, the campus continued. Students walking to class, cars passing on the street, life happening in all its ordinary chaos. But in that small space between us, everything had gone quiet. I pulled back first, stepped away. "When you figure it out," I said, "let me know." I walked away and didn't let myself look back. Didn't let myself see if he was watching me leave. I made it to my apartment before the tears came, before everything I'd been holding back finally broke through. Harper came over without being asked. Held me while I cried. Didn't tell me it would be okay. Some things I was learning didn't come with that guarantee. I didn't go to the next game, or the one after that. I told myself it was because I had work to do, deadlines to meet, a senior project that wasn't going to complete itself. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't sit in those bleachers and watch Carter play like nothing had changed. Couldn't watch him be golden and perfect in public while I sat in the shadows we'd shared, remembering what it felt like when he chose to hide. Harper went to my place once, came back and told me he'd looked for me. Scanned the bleachers during warm-ups, after every score, his eyes searching that northeast corner where I used to sit. She said he looked lost. Good, I'd said, and meant it. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Finals approached. Campus took on that desperate, exhausted quality that comes at the end of a semester. I buried myself in work, in finishing my portfolio, in anything that kept my hands busy and my mind from wandering to places it shouldn't go. Carter's final home game fell on a Friday in mid-December. Senior night, though he was only a junior. They were honoring the graduating players, but everyone knew the real draw was watching Carter Blake play one last time before bowl season. The game had been sold out for weeks. I had no intention of going. I was done with that. Done with him. But Harper showed up at my apartment 2 hours before kickoff with my jacket in her hands. "You need to go," she said. "I don't," I said. "Yes," she said. "You do. Not for him. For you. So you can close this chapter knowing you didn't run from the ending." I told her I wasn't running. I'd made a choice. A healthy one. She gave me that look she had, the one that said she loved me, but also thought I was being an idiot. "Then go prove it," she said. "Go sit in your spot one last time and watch him play and then walk away. But don't let fear make the choice for you." So I went. The stadium was packed, every seat filled, the energy electric in that way it only gets for important games. I climbed to my old spot in the northeast corner, sat down with my jacket pulled tight against the December cold. I didn't bring my sketchbook. Didn't need to. This wasn't about capturing anything. It was about letting go. The game started. Carter played like he was on fire. Like every throw, every run, every impossible play was something he needed to prove. The crowd roared. The announcers couldn't contain themselves. He was everything they said. He was: transcendent, unstoppable, destined for greatness. And I sat there and watched and felt nothing but the ache of something that had almost been beautiful. The final whistle blew. Carter's team won by 3 touchdowns. The stadium erupted. His teammates lifted him onto their shoulders, celebration and confetti and light everywhere. He was lifted high above the crowd, his face split in a smile that looked almost real. Then he climbed down. The celebration continued around him, but he stepped away from it, moved toward the edge of the field. His eyes went to the bleachers. Scanning, searching, he found me. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across that familiar distance. 40 rows, a fence, a world of difference. All the space we'd tried so hard to collapse. Then he did something I never expected. He started walking. Not toward the locker room, not toward the press area, not toward any of the places he was supposed to go. Toward the bleachers. Toward me. The crowd noticed. The noise shifted, confusion rippling through the stands. Cameras followed him. His teammates called his name. But he kept walking, steady and deliberate, until he reached the fence at the edge of the student section. He looked up at me. His chest was heaving, sweat and exertion, and something that looked like terror written across his face. The stadium had gone quiet in that way that meant everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting to understand what story was being told. He reached out his hand, not a wave, not a gesture, an invitation. His palm open, extended toward me across the fence and 40 rows and everything that had kept us separate. My heart stopped. The entire world reduced to that single image. Carter Blake, in full uniform under stadium lights, with thousands of people watching, reaching for me. I didn't move. Couldn't. Every instinct I had screamed that this was impossible, that moving toward him meant stepping into a spotlight I'd spent my whole life avoiding, meant being seen in a way I couldn't take back. But I thought about what Harper had said, about not letting fear make choices for me. I thought about Carter's voice in the dark saying, "You're the only thing I've ever wanted that scares me." I thought about all the times I'd chosen safety over truth, invisibility over risk. And I stood up. The walk down from the bleachers felt like it took hours. Every step was a decision. Every row I descended made me more visible, more exposed. I could feel eyes on me from every direction, could hear the murmur of confusion, speculation, realization spreading through the crowd. I reached the fence. Carter was still there, still waiting, his hands still extended. His eyes were wet and his jaw was set, and he looked more terrified than I'd ever seen him. But he didn't lower his hand. I climbed over the fence, dropped down onto the track that circled the field. The distance between us collapsed to inches. The stadium had gone completely silent. I looked at his hand, looked at his face, saw everything we'd been, everything we might become, everything that would change the moment I reached back. Then I took it. His fingers closed around mine, solid and warm and real. He pulled me closer, pulled me into the light, and the stadium erupted into something I couldn't name. Not quite cheering, not quite shock, something in between, but I barely heard it. Because Carter was looking at me like I was the only person in the world, and for the first time since I'd known him, there was nothing between us but the truth. The weeks after were harder than the moment itself. That's the thing nobody tells you about courage. It's not the single act that costs you, it's everything that comes after. The interviews Carter had to give, the statements from the athletic department, the scrutiny that turned both of our lives inside out for public consumption. Some people were supportive. Some were cruel. Most were just curious, treating us like a fascinating social experiment rather than two people trying to figure out how to exist together in daylight. Carter's photo came down from the stadium wall. Not officially, not dramatically, just quietly removed one night, replaced with a generic team shot. Nobody made an announcement. Nobody had to. We both understood what it meant. Some silences are louder than words. But something else happened too. My senior project was due in January, and I'd been working on it in fragments, stolen hours between everything else falling apart. It was a series of portraits, all charcoal and graphite, exploring visibility and identity. Harper had suggested I submit it for the Arts Building's winter showcase. I almost didn't. Almost kept it private the way I'd kept everything private. But I thought about Carter reaching out his hand in front of thousands of people. About the cost of that choice. About how he'd chosen to be seen because staying hidden was no longer an option. So I submitted the work. The showcase opened on a Thursday evening in late January. The Arts Building was packed with students and faculty and people from town who came to these things. My series was displayed in the main gallery, 12 large-scale portraits on the far wall. I stood in the corner and watched people move through the space, studying each piece, reading the title cards. The final piece was the largest. 2 figures on an empty field, rendered in careful detail. No crowd, no game, no performance. Just 2 people standing close enough that their edges blurred together, their faces turned toward each other in a moment of quiet recognition. The background was darkness giving way to light, charcoal fading into white space. I titled it Uncovered. Carter showed up halfway through the evening. I saw him come through the door, hesitate, then spot me across the room. He was wearing a jacket I'd never seen before, his hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger. Less like the quarterback, more like the person I'd met in the dark behind the stadium. He walked over slowly, hands in his pockets, and stood next to me. We both looked at the wall of portraits. At the final piece that was unmistakably us. "It's good," he said quietly. "It's true," I said. He smiled. "Yeah, it is." We stood there in comfortable silence, while people moved around us, while conversations hummed in the background, while life continued in all its ordinary complexity. Someone approached to ask me questions about technique and process. Carter stepped back to give me space, but didn't leave. Just waited, patient and present. Later, after the gallery had emptied and it was just Harper and a few other students helping to close up, Carter and I walked out into the January cold together. No plan, no destination. Just walking side by side across campus while our breath fogged in the air. Things were different now. We held hands on the quad in daylight. We sat together in the cafe where I worked. We existed as a unit rather than as 2 separate people trying to find each other in shadows. It wasn't always easy. There were still stares, still comments, still moments when Carter's jaw would tighten and I could see him calculating whether this was worth it. But he never let go of my hand. We found a bench near the library and sat down. The campus was quiet this time of night, just a few students hurrying between buildings. The lights from the stadium were visible in the distance, dark now, waiting for next season. "I never thank you," Carter said. "For what?" I asked. "For not giving up on me. For asking me to be brave, even when I didn't know how." I leaned into him, felt his arm come around my shoulders. "You did the same for me," I said. "You asked me to be seen." We sat there in the cold, 2 people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to stay together in light. It wasn't the dramatic ending I might have drawn. There was no sweeping music, no perfect resolution. Just the quiet knowledge that we'd both chosen something hard and real over something easy and hollow. The stadium lights flickered on in the distance, automated timers bringing them to life for maintenance or security. Carter looked toward them, then looked at me. "You want to go?" he asked. "To the field," I said. Yeah. We walked together across campus, through the gates that were always open, onto the turf that had once represented everything between us. But now it was just a field, empty and ordinary in ours. Carter pulled me close, kissed me in the center of the 50-yard line with nobody watching, nobody cheering, nobody there to witness or document or turn it into content. Just us, finally, with nothing left to hide. When we pulled apart, I was smiling. So was he. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." And we did. Together. In the light. With the quiet certainty that some things are worth fighting for, worth being seen for, worth choosing over and over again, even when it costs you everything you thought you knew about safety. We walked off the field hand in hand, and behind us the stadium lights blazed on, illuminating nothing but empty space and the memory of who we'd been before we found each other. Before we learned that being seen by the right person makes all the other eyes bearable. Before we understood that love, real love, doesn't hide in shadows. It stands in the light and says, "This is who I am. This is who I choose," and doesn't apologize for either.